probably should not have the TV playing in the background. The ceilings were all white and gold with large. Hi everyone, it's me, Emma. So some of you might remember back during lockdown quarantine when everybody in the world was staying home all the time, I would do live reading videos on Facebook of my newest novel, The Witch of Marshallville. So I just recently got a bunch of new sort of home recording equipment in. I wanted to give it a test drive. And I also kind of wanted to show some love to some of the other novels that I'm currently working on. So I thought I would start putting together videos of me reading chapters from these novels. And, you know, practice my video editing just a bit. So here we are. For this video, I'm actually going to be reading the first chapter from a novel that I started about 2 years ago. It's called The Whitehall Affair. And this novel is kind of an experiment sort of thing. It's my first and potentially only foray into writing a ghost story. And I mean, I love ghost stories. Never written one before. Thought I would, you know, try my hand at it, see if I'm any good. This is kind of the result of that. I got the original idea for it when I was walking home from work one day, and on my playlist, Hosier's The Arsonist Lullaby came on, and the idea kind of started, you know, it was like at the back of my head, a little bit of a niggle, like it was almost there, but I just couldn't see it. So I did what any other writer would do. I put the song on repeat and listened to it for about 2 or 3 hours until I finally had the idea. And what came from that was actually this first chapter that I'm about to read. The rest of the story came to me over a much longer span of time. In fact, I think I just finished plotting out everything to the end about 2 months ago. And up until that point, I think I only had about 5 chapters written. But just kind of a brief introduction to the Whitehall Affair. The novel is set in modern-day New York City, and it centers around a young woman named Nora Wright, who is a reporter at a kind of small mid-market newspaper. She's been there for several years at this point, and for a long time, she kind of had big aspirations of becoming you know, a really important journalist, maybe working at the New York Times, but something in her life happened that left her with very crippling anxiety, and so all those dreams were just kind of dissipated because she didn't feel like that was something that she could do anymore. And helping her along this journey is her boyfriend Ian and her best friend Margot. But as for the rest, you're just going to have to listen to find out. Also, another one of the main characters that I'll mention is the Whitehall Mansion, which this whole story is centered around, but I'll kind of get into explaining that a little bit more in a bit. Chapter 1 of the Whitehall Affair, Unfinished Business. Ian, stop! You're walking too fast, the woman called out, laughing slightly as she struggled to keep up with him in her heels. She was constantly running, she felt, a combination of his long legs and her short ones. The sequins on her dress tinkled as she ran, while she reached up to make sure her headband was still in place. Silently, she cursed herself for not thinking to grab a jacket before they left the apartment. But she didn't have one that matched the red flapper dress that she was donning, and she hadn't thought that it would get that cold. Ian laughed as he stopped and turned to face her. "You should learn to keep up, Nor," he replied, raising an eyebrow at her. Nora huffed as she scampered up to his side, looping her arm through his, hoping it would slow him down. "Heels were not meant for running slick," she retorted as they started walking at a slower pace down the sidewalk. "Then why did you wear them?" he asked, glancing down at her. "Because it pulls the whole look together," she said half-heartedly as he chuckled. "And Margot made me wear them. She picked out this whole damn outfit, delivered it last week, and swore she'd kill me if I didn't wear it." "I, for one, think you look rather brilliant," he said, leaning down to kiss her cheek. "Trust me, Nora. You're gonna have fun tonight." Nora wrinkled her nose slightly. "A party? Me?" she asked, looking up at him. "We live together. I do know how many times you've watched The Great Gatsby, you know," he replied. "And didn't Margot say they got that band you're always watching on YouTube?" I do love postmodern jukebox, she said with a sigh. And I'm here with you. Just try and relax and have fun tonight, he said. Nora nodded. Margot has been going on and on about this thing for months, she said. Don't know how she got the Whitehall Mansion. Is it that famous? Ian asked. Yeah, Nora said with a snort. It's notoriously hard to book, and the place is infamous for all the riotous parties they had back in the 20s just after it was finished. Margot came over with a bottle of champagne the night she got it booked. Nora went silent as her eyes widened as they neared the venue. The sidewalk was crowded with a red carpet and photographers. God. She stopped for a moment. Are you all right? Ian asked softly. Nora looked up at him and smiled tensely. I got this. Come on. Nora stopped and stared at the crowded ballroom for a moment as soon as they walked in. It was a cacophony of sound, lights, and glittering jewels. They were at a launch event for one of the authors that was signed with the publishing house that her best friend Margot worked at. As the mystery was set in the 1920s, they had opted to take a hard right into Gatsbyland, and it was very clear that they had spared no expense. Granted, Nora wasn't so sure they had strobe lights back in the 1920s. The mansion itself had long been a fixture in New York City, as was the family that owned it. It was a long line of businessmen, though they were from old money originally. Nora couldn't help as her eyes went up, drinking in every detail of the room. The ceilings were all white and gold with large Art Deco chandeliers. She then looked back down to the room itself. There were plush red velvet settees all around and tables towards the back. At the front, the band was on a stage as hundreds of people filled the dance floor in front of it. She couldn't help but smile as she tapped her foot in time to a 20s version of a current pop song. You all right, Nora? Ian asked, looking down at her. Nora met his eyes, her own wide. Yeah, just wow, she said, looking back to the party. Everyone was decked out in the best 1920s attire, and Nora was sure a fair amount of it was actual vintage. Only the rich and famous would be here tonight. Nora and Ian only got passes thanks to Margot. Come on then, Ian said, patting her arm as he started leading her towards the back of the room, where there were several tables with food as well as drinks. There were also servers walking around with trays of champagne. Ian stopped momentarily and grabbed 2 glasses, turning to hand one to Nora. She sipped at it as he continued leading her back, and she glanced around the massive room. There was no way they were going to find Margot in this mayhem. Nora! The couple stopped and turned, seeing a tall, red-headed woman with long legs rushing up to them. She was decked out in a black flapper dress, with a long fringe that swung and bounced around her legs as she walked. Her hair was pulled up into a faux bob, a matching headband helping hold it in place. I knew that dress would look amazing on you, she gushed as she hugged Nora and kissed her cheek. Oh, I could never pull off that shade of red. I appreciate the dress, Nora said, glancing down at it, then looking back up at her friend as she tugged self-consciously on a dirty blonde curl. Margot could easily pass for a model and looked good in just about anything. Please, as if I wasn't going to make sure my best friend was dressed amazingly to come see my triumph firsthand, Margot exclaimed, looking around the room. Every celebrity we invited came. Thought I recognized a few faces, Ian said. How did you get Hugh Jackman here? Margot looked back at him, grinning. Not sharing my secrets, she said, her green eyes dancing. But I must say, you do clean up well, Ian. Had to if I was going to be rubbing elbows with the rich and famous, he replied lightly. Margot just snorted. So, I see you have champagne. I've managed to get you 2 spots at a table. It's mostly some lower tier clients of ours, but I figured since you guys like to read so much, you wouldn't mind, she said. Nora froze for a moment. She wasn't good at small talk. Not anymore, anyway. It was hard enough being in a crowded room surrounded by celebrities. She already felt like she didn't belong. She was just a lowly reporter at a mid-market paper, after all. At least Ian had a more prominent future. He was an up-and-coming surgical resident. He was also from a wealthy family in London. Glancing over at him, Nora couldn't help but think he fit in more at this ritzy party than she did. Come on, Nora, Ian said, tugging on her hand. She looked up at him and smiled, noticing Margot was already leading them off. Taking a deep breath, she started walking. They wove in and out of people standing around, drinking from old-fashioned champagne glasses as they talked and laughed. Here we are, Margot said, stopping at a table. Nora looked down, seeing her and Ian's names on cards next to each other. The rest of the table was empty, though there were signs that others had been there. Several liquor bottles were already opened. I need to go check on some things, but I'll be back. In the meantime, enjoy yourselves. And for God's sake, Ian, get her on the dance floor at least once tonight. With a wink, Margot sauntered off. Ian held out the chair for Nora to sit. While it was still a bit overwhelming, she couldn't help but be enchanted by the event. She did love the 1920s, and Margot had done a brilliant job putting it all together. She said there's some sort of hidden whiskey bar around here, Nora said, turning to Ian with a conspiratorial smile. You looking for an excuse to ditch the ballroom already? He asked, an eyebrow raised. Nora shook her head. Nah, just know how much you like whiskey, she replied before taking a drink. And I've always wondered what this place looks like on the inside. She could feel Ian staring at her. What? It's good to see you enjoying yourself a bit more, he replied, smiling at her. Nora laughed softly and shook her head. Seriously, Ian. I'm being serious, Nora. I know the last few years haven't been easy for you. Let's just enjoy the party, yeah? Nora said, cutting him off. Ian nodded and then leaned over to kiss her. Let's. So you're this mysterious Ian and Nora, a woman said loudly as she walked over and plopped down in a chair next to the couple. She grinned before tossing back the rest of her drink and then sticking her hand out towards them. Meredith Michaels, I wrote Molly's Calling, she said brightly. Ian glanced at Nora before they shook her hand. Neither had heard of the book. Nice to meet you, Nora said politely. You've never heard of my book, have you? Meredith asked, taking in the looks on their faces. Ian glanced at Nora. No, sorry, he said. Meredith just waved her hand at him. No worries, didn't expect you to, she said, looking towards the dancing a moment. But at least they got good bottle service here. She looked around the table before her eyes lit up and she reached for a bottle of whiskey. Pouring some into a shot glass, she paused and looked over at Ian and Nora. Join me? Oh, I don't. Come on, Nora. Thought tonight was about having fun, Ian said, smiling at her. Sighing, she ended up nodding as she smiled in return. Might as well, she said. Meredith gleefully poured out 2 more shots and handed them over. To new friends, she shouted. Ian laughed as they all clinked glasses together. God, this is going to be a night. A couple hours later, Nora pushed through the crowd and turned a corner. She smiled in relief as she found the sign for the bathroom, though it quickly disappeared when she saw how long the line was. Groaning softly, she looked around, wondering if there was another one nearby. I already looked. The other bathroom line is just as long, the woman at the end of the line said, sensing Nora's frustration. Thanks, she said, moving to step into line behind her. The woman glanced over, noticing that she was tapping her foot slightly. She looked around and then leaned over. If you're sneaky about it, go down that hallway and take a left. There's a staircase that goes up to the 2nd floor. We're not supposed to go up there, but there's another bathroom with no line. Take a left at the top, and it's the 5th door on the left, she whispered softly. Nora looked over at her wide-eyed. Used it earlier when I couldn't wait in line. Nora then nodded and smiled gratefully. Thanks, she said before starting down the hallway. She kept her face composed as she walked quickly and then turned the corner. She glanced up and down it as she walked, noting there wasn't anyone around. Nora then came to a small stairway that had a red cord in front of it. This must be it. Stopping and glancing around again, she then managed to step over the cord and quietly make her way up the dark stairs. There were no lights in the stairway, making it difficult to maneuver, though she could see a soft light coming from the next floor. Nora moved slowly, gripping the wall as she stepped carefully and cursed under her breath over the damn heels. She knew she should have worn flats. Finally, she made it up to the 2nd floor, breathing a sigh of relief that it was at least lit, though just barely. There were lamps up and down the hallway, though they were on a pretty low setting. Cautiously, she started making her way down the hallway, trying to remember the directions the woman had given her. Was it 5th on the right or the left? Shit, she muttered under her breath, though she kept going. From somewhere behind her, there was a noise. Nora stopped and looked back, a chill running through her body. She didn't see anything, but turned around, determined to find the bathroom and get back to the party as quickly as possible. She walked a bit farther and stopped in front of a door, hoping that she had remembered the directions correctly. The noise happened again, causing her to jump and shove the door open, then shut it quickly behind her, finding herself in complete darkness. "Shit!" she muttered again, reaching around on the wall for a light switch. Finding one, she quickly flipped it, and light flooded the room. Sighing, she realized that she wasn't in a bathroom, but instead in some sort of bedroom. It was too small to have been one of the main rooms or a guest room, so she figured she must be in the old servants' quarter. The small bed was bare, and most of the furniture was covered in sheets, giving off an eerie vibe. There were also several boxes around. Pushing off from the door, Nora wandered over, glancing down into an open one, seeing a stack of framed photos in it. She then looked over in relief as she saw an open door leading to a bathroom. Moving quickly, she took care of business and got herself situated, preparing to go back to the party. But as she passed by the box, her curiosity got the better of her as she reached down into it and pulled one of the photos out. It was taken in the ballroom during the 20s, likely one of the lavish parties she had heard about from back in the day. The room was packed with people. Nora replaced the photo and reached for another, studying each one with an amused look on her face. As she was replacing the last one, she started to turn away, but stopped, seeing a large photo just underneath it of a young woman. It was as though something was drawing her back to it. Cautiously, she reached down and picked it up, pulling it out of the box. She couldn't help as her heart started racing slightly and her eyes widened. The woman was sitting on a chair in what appeared to be a white day dress, though she wasn't sure as it was in black and white. She appeared rich, refined, her seemingly blonde hair styled in perfect finger waves. She was smiling, but there was a hint of something else in her eyes. Nora wasn't sure, but there was something strange about it. The woman looked exactly like her. Nora brought the photo closer to her face as a heavy feeling filled the room. It was becoming slightly harder to breathe. Nora looked away, thinking perhaps her eyes were playing trick on her. But when she looked back, it was the same. The urge to leave overcame her as Nora quickly put the photo back and made for the door, her hands shaking as she pulled it open. Moving as quickly as she could in the heels, she made her way back down the creepy hallway, not even bothering to shut the door or turn out the light before she left. All she wanted to do was get back to Ian and shake off the odd feeling that had settled over her. Perhaps laughing off the photo over a drink. Or maybe not. Perhaps she had imagined the whole thing because she'd had too much already. Meredith, while proving entertaining, had kept a steady stream of shots coming her way. Tumbling down the stairs, Nora made her way over the court again and strode down the hallway. As she heard the music from the band, she couldn't help as relief started to fill her. The farther she got from the room, the more she felt like perhaps it had been a weird coincidence. Nora chuckled, shaking her head. She was probably drunk. That had to be it. She rounded another corner and nearly sprinted to the entrance leading to the main ballroom, sidestepping around various people. Never in the past few years did she ever think that she would be grateful to be back in a crowded party. The band was playing a spirited tune as couples danced up a storm. Nora stopped and watched for a moment, wondering if they had brought in professional dancers. They all seemed to be doing the Charleston rather well, much better than Nora could. Ian had gotten her out for a bit, but her feet kept getting tangled up together. "There you are, Dorothy!" Nora swung her head around, seeing a grinning man with dark hair and a thin mustache coming up to her. She looked around, wondering who he was talking to, but there was no one else standing next to her. She looked back at the man, noting that he had taken the dress code rather seriously. He looked like he had just stepped out of a movie from the 20s. He stepped up to her and wrapped an arm around her waist, leaning in for a kiss. Nora pushed him away, confused. "Excuse me," she said indignantly. The man laughed and started pulling her towards the dance floor. "Come on, don't be such a spoilsport, Dorothy," the man said. Nora tried to pull herself back, but something out of the corner of her eye caught her attention. She whipped her head over, seeing a large mirror on the wall. Her eyes widened as she saw her normally long hair now inches shorter in finger waves. That wasn't how she fixed her hair before she left. The man took advantage of the moment to yank her onto the dance floor, wrapping one arm around her waist as he held the other one out and pulled her close to him. Her heart started racing as he led her around the floor. Frantically, she looked around, the faces starting to blur together. She finally settled on the band, noticing that the stage was gone and a completely different group of people were now playing music. Had they changed the band in the few minutes she'd been gone? Surely there wasn't enough time. "What's going on?" she shouted, whipping her head around in horror. Where were the photographers, the tables? No one had their phones out taking photos or selfies. The ballroom looked the same, yet still somehow different. She looked up at the chandeliers, then back down at the man. "Come on, give me a kiss," he said, leaning towards her. Nora shoved him away and stumbled out of his arms, knocking into a nearby couple. "Watch it, will ya?" Nora spun around, staring at them as they moved off. She was in the middle of the dance floor, walking around in a slow circle as it became harder to breathe. Her heart was racing now, and no matter how hard she tried to take deep breaths and calm down, she couldn't. She knew she was about to have a panic attack in the middle of the dance floor. Where was Ian? "Ian? Ian!" she shouted, searching through the crowd again. Even though she was no longer moving, it felt like the room continued to spin around her. "Dorothy, what's wrong?" "That's not my name!" she shouted as she screwed her eyes shut for a moment, willing the room to stop spinning. She stumbled and opened her eyes, looking around frantically again. For a moment, the music, conversation, and laughter fainted to a dull throb in the back of her head, as the only thing she could hear was her own haggard breathing. She finally locked eyes with the man, who was still moving towards her, an odd look on his face. But just before he reached her, Nora's eyes rolled into the back of her head, and everything went black. Nora gasped loudly as she shot up. She looked around, immediately recognizing her bedroom as the morning light streamed in from 2 large windows. She then looked down, feeling her body. She was in her pajamas. Taking shaky breaths, she untangled her legs from the comforter and tossed them over the edge of the bed, leaning over as she rubbed her face. How did she get here? Everything seemed fuzzy as her head started pounding. She'd been at the party. She remembered looking for a bathroom and getting turned around, hearing odd noises in the creepy hallway. Her eyes flew open as she remembered the room she had stumbled into, the weird feeling, the photo of the woman that looked exactly like her. Her stomach began turning as she remembered what happened after. She looked around the room again, seeing her dress laid out neatly on an armchair with her shoes tucked underneath. Ian wasn't there, but she could smell coffee coming from the kitchen. Her heart started racing again as she thought of the crazy episode in the ballroom. But she knew it couldn't have been real. Did she have an hallucination or something? She remembered the start of a panic attack, someone calling her Dorothy, and then nothing else. Looking up, she shook her head and sighed. What happened last night? So, that was chapter 1 of the Whitehall affair called Unfinished Business. As you can see, the Whitehall Mansion is going to play a pretty big role in the story. Now, it's not a haunted house story, per se. Things happen in the White House Mansion. Things also happen other places. But kind of the main story very much revolves around this mansion. And I kind of, throughout this novel, I wanted to make it its own sort of character as well. As we get into further chapters, you can see if I do that and let me know what you think. I hope you enjoyed this first chapter from the Whitehall affair. I know I've enjoyed getting into it. So I drew a lot from kind of like those old business tycoon mansions when I was creating the Whitehall Mansion, and had a lot of fun with that. But yeah, you'll get to see a lot more of that in upcoming chapters. But I hope you enjoyed that. Let me know what you think. I'm actually currently posting this story on Wattpad. You can search eKalka, which is my publishing name. I've got, I think, a few stories posted up there that you can check out. But this one is definitely up there. I think I have up through chapter 7 posted. I'm going to do some more writing and editing this week before I post another one. But thank you for watching. Let me know if you like this, if you have any feedback, anything that I should improve. I always welcome and appreciate feedback of any kind. Constructive criticism is very much welcome. But yeah, I'll see you guys next time. It was a good... Words, people. Words. I should not use words that I am unsure of how to pronounce. Cacophony. Seriously, I did not know how hard reading was. I mean, I read the news. I read the news for a living. So I see you have I see you have champagne. I wish I had champagne. That would be great.